He stood solitary in the dust, a German shepherd with a twisted leg, quaking beneath the burden of every whisper, and in the crowd, not a single hand was raised. Not one. They labeled him as broken, unfixable. The auctioneer was mere moments from concluding when a man, unnoticed by the crowd, subtly lifted his hand. Silence enveloped the room. Without a moment's pause, a single, straightforward action could trigger a series of unfolding events. One might ponder what it was about this dog that drew a stranger from the shadows, and what hidden truth lay beneath. That man bore a burden that led him straight into the suffering others fled from. This narrative will draw you further in, more than you anticipate, a voyage of fidelity, atonement, and a connection that could very well transform your perspective on the world. Before we get started, please like this video and share your location in the comments. Observing from a distance, we eagerly await your thoughts. The Billings livestock auction wasn't precisely the sort of venue one frequented. Seeking elegance amidst the swirling cattle dust, the clanging of metal gates, and the unyielding cries of buyers evaluating the available stock left little space to breathe, much less to feel. Yet, on that day, something transformed the clamor into quiet. It wasn't the most boisterous voice or the largest presence. It was the dog. He entered with a limp, slipping through the side gate, a shadow attempting to recall the art of moving in the light. A male German shepherd, stained with mud, fur adorned with old scars, one hind leg trailing behind as if it had surrendered long ago. His ribs jutted out, visible beneath the surface. His fur was patchy, and a faded chain scar encircled his neck. A haunting reminder he couldn't escape. He remained silent, offering no bark. He stood there, trembling slightly yet resolute, as if he understood his destiny was on the verge of being determined in the presence of indifferent onlookers, who had no interest in his identity. The auctioneer, typically booming with enthusiasm, he tripped over his presentation. A few murmurs echoed throughout the barn. That one's finished. He's not worth the effort. Probably nipped at someone. No offers. Not even Nathan of pity. The silence surrounding him wasn't born from awe, it stemmed from indifference. He wasn't a mere animal to them. He was a weight with a pulse. Just as the auctioneer began to advance, tapping his gavel toward the gate to address the situation with the dog, a hand was raised. Silently in the background, it didn't proclaim, it didn't gesture, it simply ascended steady and resolute, as if it had been anticipating this precise instant. Heads turned and whispers trailed behind. One recognized the man. He donned a weathered leather jacket that had traveled more miles than most trucks in the yard, and boots smeared with the rich earth of Montana. His hair touched with silver at the temples, and a weathered scar telling stories of the past traced along his jawline like a secret route to a place he never mentioned. His name remained unspoken. His voice wasn't heard, but the way he nodded just onto carried more weight than any offer of cash. The gavel dropped. Sold. People blinked in confusion. Why would someone like that want a dog like that? Was it a mistake born of pity, or something beyond their comprehension? The man walked. He moved slowly down the aisle, unwavering and composed, showing no sign of hesitation or flinching as the dog raised his. The German shepherd gazed, legs trembling, yet there was an undeniable spark in those amber eyes. Eyes flickered like a dying ember, catching the wind. When the man knelt beside him, he didn't reach to grab her. He gently rested an open hand on the dog's shoulder, exuding a sense of calm and patience. What unfolded next took everyone by surprise. The dog inched closer, just slightly, but leaned into that moment, touch, as though it were the first genuine connection he had experienced in years. He neither growled nor cried. He simply allowed himself to rest. The pressure against the man's leg, a quiet breath. It lacked drama. It wasn't loud, yet everyone sensed it. It was akin to observing two fractured entities rediscover the art of supporting one another. A bystander captured it on their device. The recording remained still, a stranger and a dog, quiet amidst the surrounding chaos. It was an auction yard, and the moment was enough to capture widespread attention. However, What remained unseen was the motivation behind that raised hand. The narrative unfolds, concealed within the man's gaze, and the dog's actions in the coming days would provoke deep reflections on the extent of suffering. It takes time to finally bring someone home. The road home was lined with rust-colored trees, clinging to their last breath of life. Autumn. The old pickup groaned over every bump as if it had its own opinions. But Jacob, Kane remained silent, his grip steady on the wheel, his gaze fixed ahead. The path forward, yet their gaze drifted back to the rearview mirror more than once, where the dog rested, curled up in the truck. In the stillness of the night, his eyes were only half closed, caught in a delicate balance between wakefulness and slumber. Each sudden movement sent a ripple of tension through him, causing him to flinch involuntarily, as though anticipating the world to become harsh once more at any moment. Yet, this wasn't the auction yard was no longer a place of interest, and Jacob stood apart from the rest. The cabin awaited its fate in silence, on the outskirts of Laurel, Montana, where the pines whispered secrets and solitude reigned. Visitors arrived only when they were lost. It stood like a forgotten artifact, partially consumed by the encroaching trees. Featuring a porch that leaned just enough to impart its unique charm, Jacob had spent years there in solitude. No visitors, no deliveries, just an old stove and a woodpile stacked with military precision. Precision and a bed that had long since forgotten the meaning of companionship. He hadn't brought anything home until now. Jacob held the dog in his arms as if it were a precious relic, cautious not to disturb a spirit. The dog remained still. He trembled slightly, his breathing shallow, as if uncertain he had the right to rest. Jacob laid him on an old flannel, the blanket near the hearth, towels added, and the fire stoked until it danced. Warmth crept in slowly, wrapping around the edges of the room. Still, the dog didn't. He closed his eyes. That night, Jacob prepared a simple stew. The dog refused to eat, remained still, observing intently. His gaze followed each movement, each breath, every. In that instant, the man's hand lingered close to an object that was either sharp or heated. It wasn't a feeling of fear. It was a protective instinct, as if he had been trained for this very moment. Long ago, that silence could shift to chaos in an instant. Jacob held back. He refrained from making the call. He chose not to issue commands. Instead, he simply took a seat across from him and whispered almost to. The flames danced, casting shadows. The dog's ears perked up, sensing something amiss. Not much, it seemed to say, just enough to reveal the truth. The flicker of recognition, or perhaps curiosity, danced in the air. Jacob attempted once more, his tone gentler. "Shadow, that's your name now." The dog remained still, neither accepting nor rejecting it. But the stillness wavered gently, as if the breeze beyond had reconsidered its course. How frigid the night had to be. 4 hours Jacob remained still in that place. He neither read nor slept. He simply observed the flames dance against the aged wooden walls, while the dog remained motionless, eyes wide open. Open, ever observant. When the flames finally danced in perfect harmony, Shadow flinched. Jacob said nothing. He simply reached over and pulled an extra. He pulled the blanket closer and let his hand rest on the edge of the bedding, careful not to touch. Just near, Shadow stared at that hand for minutes, unmoving. Then, as if testing gravity itself, he moved just an inch until the tip of his paw brushed against the man's fingers. No lightning, no grand spectacle. An orchestral swell. Two lives dragged across gravel, discovering one another in the softest, most delicate moment. Morning arrived, shrouded in frost that covered the windows. While the forest outside remained in slumber, Jacob remained undisturbed. To the sound of barking or movement, he awoke to a comforting warmth at his side. Shadow had shifted during the night. Night curled up near the fireplace, drawing closer to the man who had asked for nothing from him. It wasn't trust, yet it wasn't peace. However, it marked the beginning, and beginnings hold significance. At times, healing doesn't come with fanfare or dazzling displays. Instead, It may be found in the subtle sound of claws gently brushing against the worn surface of the past. Floorboards in the shared breath of a man and a dog who both witnessed the weight of the world, and the unspoken understanding that perhaps the cabin held secrets beyond mere apparitions. The dawn following their inaugural night together unfolded in a serene hushes. Most mornings unfolded in the cabin just outside Laurel, where frost glinted off the surfaces. Pine needles scattered as if silver dust had been delicately sprinkled throughout the forest within. Jacob brewed coffee with a potency that could rouse the slumbering. Yet, his gaze drifted away from the steaming mug, fixated instead on Shadow, the dog, who lay curled up comfortably, close to the warmth of the fireplace. I opened up, ever observant, yet hesitant to place my trust. Much healing had a rhythm, and Shadow wasn't ready to join the dance just yet. Jacob sat down, a bowl of soft food, chicken, rice, some bone broth. Yet Shadow remained still, until Jacob settled next to him on the hardwood floor. Then, slowly, as if his body had come to understand betrayal through touch, the dog leaned forward, ready to eat, but only if Jacob remained close. He didn't devour like a famished wanderer. He stopped intermittently, glancing at the man standing firm. For the echo of a boot step, a shout, a hand lifted in the wrong direction. As the days, Shadow's limp showed no signs of improvement. In fact, Jacob observed something even more troubling. On the third afternoon, following a slow and deliberate stroll in the yard, Jacob attempted to brush out the dog's matted coat near the hindquarters. That's when it happened. A single stroke near the back leg sent Shadow twisted into a whirl. He jerked, snarling not with aggression, but with a primal instinct. "Hun, hello." A guttural sound erupted from his throat, not to hurt, but to warn. Jacob froze. As the brush fell to the ground, Shadow recoiled, trembling with fear. Tail tucked tightly against his body, heart pounding in his chest, while Jacob remained still. He didn't approach. Instead, he knelt slowly, palm up, and waited in the shadows. He didn't return right away. Instead, he remained at the edge of the rug, his body rigid, eyes flickered with the urgency of a cornered creature, bracing for the inevitable. 10 agonizing minutes slipped by before he dared to take a single, tentative step ahead. Then another until at last his snout nudged softly against Jacob's hand. A silent capitulation, not faith, merely fatigue from bearing the burden of all that has transpired before the night deepened. As Jacob gently traced his fingers along the dog's body to examine the healing wound, when he noticed something unusual beneath the fur. Not just one, but multiple circular patches, tiny burns, some old, some new. Deliberate action taken by an individual fully aware of the areas a dog couldn't access to scratch or bite. Jacob's hands came to a halt. His breath caught. His expression remained unchanged, yet his eyes revealed a different narrative: anger, guilt, and something more profound. He remained silent, shutting his eyes briefly as if seeking to ground himself before embarking on a reckless act. As the fire flickered low, Jacob retrieved a weathered leather-bound journal from beneath his bed. He settled at the kitchen table. Seated at the table, pen in hand, I started to write, not for the eyes of others, but as a man would. Struggling to shed burdens too heavy to bear, the ink surged swiftly. The phrases, fragmented names, and locations. Questions linger in my mind about what I should have said back then. Why didn't I take action? Did I truly consider the implications? Meanwhile, Shadow stirred in his sleep, whimpering softly, letting out low cries and gentle yelps. As if ensnared within the confines of his own gaze, Jacob approached him softly and knelt down by the fireplace. A soft whisper escaped. "You're not there anymore." Shadow's body twitched. Once settled, the nightmare faded, yet the questions remained, swirling like smoke in the air. The days that followed revealed more patterns. Shadow flinched at the sound of a chain rattling and bolted under the table. As Jacob let the metal bowl slip from his grasp, a low growl escaped his lips, directed not at those around him, but at the uniforms that surrounded him. Even the sight of a hat adorned with a badge raised his defenses. These weren't mere coincidences. They were wounds woven into the nervous system. Whoever had harmed Shadow hadn't merely fractured bones. They had shattered something deeper. Language, trust, memory. Yet, there was an additional element, something Jacob couldn't quite grasp. Whenever Shadow gazed at him with those eyes, there was no fear, no confusion, just a profound understanding. It struck with the force of an unbroken wave, as though the dog was encountering something entirely unfamiliar. Home, yet acknowledging a truth he had long understood. Jacob sensed it as well, an odd sensation that somewhere, in a way, this encounter was not their first clash. It felt more like a reunion, and whatever Shadow had been fleeing from, it wasn't only about his past. It could have belonged to Jacob as well. The stillness enveloping Jacob's cabin each night was not merely serene. It was heavy with unspoken truths, as if the very atmosphere held whispers it dared not reveal. That kind of silence emerges not from an absence of noise but from a life that has already expressed too much. And on one such, in the stillness of night, just after the clock struck midnight, a sound shattered the silence. It wasn't the rumble of thunder or the whisper of the wind. It was a 3 slow, heavy taps echoed against the door. Jacob remained still at first, neither responding nor shifting. The dog that had been napping by the fireplace. They both raised their heads simultaneously, tense and alert, like with the precision of a soldier acting on instinct. Jacob moved toward the door silently. Awaiting him on the other side was a figure clad in brown canvas, a jacket adorned with a gold badge clipped to his belt. Deputy Marshal Nathan Dwyer stood resolute, an acquaintance, yet not quite a companion either. "Evening," Dwyer said, voice low. "Apologies for the hour has come. I thought you'd want to be informed. There was a break-in at the old Wilcox Ranch. I figured you might recall that. Didn't you used to shoe horses out there, Jacob?" Shadow stepped forward, staring intently. Silent tension hung in the air, bodies poised with a low tail and ears pinned back. The moment was swift yet clear. The dog acknowledged the name and not the deputy. But the ranch Dwyer tipped his hat and departed, leaving a car behind without uttering another word. Jacob closed. The door creaked as it secured itself, the bolt sliding into place alongside the chain. He remained motionless, caught in the moment. A lengthy pause filled the air as he simply breathed. The dog remained still, gazing up at him, as if in anticipation for something to break. Later that night, Jacob ventured out to the shed behind the cabin. Shadow moved with a subtle grace, his limbs softened by the chill in the air. The shed hadn't been opened in years. It carried the scent of rust and dust, a reminder of a past that lingered unspoken. Jacob moved directly to the back, lifted a tarp, revealing an ancient wooden crate, its structure fortified with iron. He hesitated at the corners, taking a moment before extracting it. Then, with a breath reminiscent of someone preparing to dive, he proceeded. Underwater, he unlocked it. Inside were remnants of a life left behind in army. The patch, worn and tattered, a picture capturing a younger Jacob next to a German. A shepherd reminiscent of Shadow, yet distinct. A worn leather collar, singed at the edges, and at the bottom, encircled in a collection of faded papers and receipts from ranch jobs, now long forgotten, some of which bear the Wilcox's name, and one signature, in particular, caused Jacob's hand to clench into a fist. The dog observed him from the doorway. His eyes remained unblinking, his body stayed still. It was as if he understood what was in the box before Jacob did. Jacob didn't sleep that night. He sat on the front porch. Shadow sat beside him, both enveloped in a silence that only rises when the past chooses not to intrude. He kicked the door in, realizing he could no longer keep it buried. Not the evidence, not the guilt, and certainly not the name that appeared at the bottom of the receded name he had wished to never encounter again. Once more, it loomed before me, unyielding and relentless, a reflection of a relentless pursuit. There was something had commenced the moment he raised his hand at that auction. Not a rescue, not even a redemption. It was a reckoning, and every moving ahead from this moment was no longer focused on healing. It was about seeking answers. And if Shadow's nightmares there were signs that they might not appreciate what awaited them. Whatever transpired at Willox certainly didn't remain hidden. By morning, the frost on the roof had transformed into gentle drips, tapping softly. A rhythm emerged that clashed with Jacob's mood. Sleep had eluded him. The box was still open on the table. Shadow paced near the front door, restless, his paws tapping. The wood echoed with a rhythm only he could perceive. There was no verbal agreement. Yet somehow both man and dog understood their destination. The journey to the Wilcox Ranch unfolded along a lengthy, meandering path that twisted through the outer edges of Custer National Forest, where towering pines stood sentinel, arched overhead, casting long, narrow shadows across the gravel. Jacob didn't. He drove in silence, the dog sitting alert in the passenger seat, its body tense yet quiet, eyes scanning the horizon, hoping for something familiar to emerge from the trees at any moment. The truck creaked with every bump, yet neither flinched. They carried a greater burden, unspoken but palpable. The old ranch emerging like a specter. The scene reveals faded fence posts, cracked windows, and barns with roofs succumbing to decay, and on themselves. Yet, it wasn't merely decay. It had the essence of a place abandoned in haste, not due to, amidst the backdrop of nature or the passage of time. An unspoken tension lingered in the air. Jacob halted the truck, his resolve firm, and stepped out into the unknown. Slowly, the dog followed, each step measured, his limp becoming more noticeable. The ground was uneven. They bypassed the front door. Instead, Shadow made his way toward the back fields, overlooking the dilapidated corral and the weathered horse trailer. It was an overgrown clearing beyond the tree line captured his attention, and Jacob pursued it closely, observing the dog as it decelerated by a cluster of towering grass and prickly thistles. Then, all at once, Shadow halted, his ears lowered. His body sank into a crouch as he sniffed the earth, pawing at it. She examined it briefly before glancing upward. The ground bore shallow indentations, irresistible, as though something or someone had once been interred there. Not deeply, not marked, just erased. Jacob knelt down and felt the cold, damp earth beneath him. Still as this it, he whispered, his voice barely rising above a breath. The dog didn't bark, remained silent, exhaling deeply as it settled next to him. The atmosphere. With a heavy heart, Jacob shut his eyes for an extended moment, lost in the memories of what he had experienced. Years have passed in an attempt to erase memories of past employment, quick money, and a particular barn filled with echoes no one ever spoke of again. But it was more than guilt. It was something worse. Complicity. He hadn't caused it, but he had been there, absorbing the whispers of the world around him, before choosing to walk away. The dog leaned in softly, a quiet companion in the moment, leaning against Jacob's shoulder, not pressing, just existing in that small, quiet connection. Held the burden of forgiveness that Jacob believed he hadn't earned. They remained there for an extended period, a man and his dog side by side in the heart of a field teeming with spirits. Yet, the stillness was fleeting. As they strolled back to the truck, a flicker of motion near the barn drew Jacob's attention. A figure swiftly darted behind the decayed exterior. Someone had been observing. He moved ahead, yet Shadow emitted a deep growl, and guttural, halting him in place. Whoever it was, they didn't emerge again. Jacob didn't pursue. Instead, he opened the glove box, pulled out a folded notepad, and wrote 3 words. "It's not." The drive back was even quieter, yet the silence felt full now. Buzzed with urgency, Jacob realized this was no longer merely about Shadow's past. It was concerning his personal responsibility and the unresolved matters that lingered in the dim corners of neglected barns and ashes. Amidst the rustic charm of the cabin, Jacob set the soiled notepad down on the table, leaving behind a trace of his recent endeavors. and started collecting the names of old contacts he hadn't spoken of in years: ranchers, auctioneers, individuals familiar with the hidden dynamics of the underworld that lay beneath the livestock industry's polished exterior. And as the fire behind him, a crackle echoed, his shadow curled up on the rug once more, this time turning away from the door. But Jacob, for now, they were no longer just the survivors. They had become a single entity, driven by purpose, and with the truth finally revealed, Jacob acted swiftly. The following morning, after just a few sips of bitter coffee, he loaded the dog into the pickup and drove east without hesitation. Toward Bozeman, the back of his mind buzzed with fragments of the previous night. That shadow at the ranch, the old fence post that appeared to conceal a graveyard's worth of mysteries. Yet, it was the dog that lingered in his thoughts more profoundly. The manner in which he had whimpered close to the soft ground, the way he had gazed at Jacob as if he understood everything. Bozeman was an hour away, and the landscape became flatter and more open. But Jacob's grip on the wheel tightened with every passing mile. He hadn't visited this vet clinic in years, not since he and Lily Merrick had ceased their conversation after, well, a significant amount of silence. Yet if anyone possessed the ability to interpret beyond the surface wounds, it was her. The moment Jacob stepped through the door, the receptionist stiffened. "Dr. Merrick," she said, called out swiftly without even inquiring for a name. And then there she stood, Elena, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp and focused. She wiped her hands on the stained cloth. She smiled, not questioning his presence. Her eyes quickly fell to the dog. The dog limped behind Jacob, then sat, its body tense, eyes flicking around. Between the two of them, it felt as if he were deciphering each moment as if it were a code. Lily approached slowly, crouching without a word, and placed a hand near the dog's neck. He didn't flinch. More than something in the air hinted at a shift. "Jacob," she finally spoke, stepping back. "Let's take a look." Inside the sterile exam room, the atmosphere changed. The dog stayed composed, allowing her to lift his paw and glide her hands along his rib cage. However, when she delicately separated the fur along his flank, she froze. "These aren't from a fence," she muttered. "These are intentional." Jacob's heart slowed and his chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Lily averted her gaze from him, concentrating instead on the. She scanned the old scar tissue and burn rings. Moving to his chest, she discovered another. The pattern, she resumed, often stemmed from shock prods. The ensuing silence was palpable, was weighed down by a heavy shock. Jacob swallowed hard, his hands curling tightly on his knees. Recalled the tales and whispers from remote ranches regarding the taming of fierce dogs, instilling in them a sense of fear and obedience. Things took a darker turn as Lily stepped back from the table and exhaled. "He's not merely mistreated. He's conditioned to endure experiences that no creature should have to face." She was compelled to endure. Then, she initiated a scan. A chip had been altered. They both leaned in as the monitor blinked, retrieving records from in the midst of a dusty digital trail. When the name surfaced, Jacob held his breath, while Lily paused, caught in a moment of uncertainty. Before reading it aloud, the dog had once been registered under a livestock holding facility that Jacob was all too familiar with. Yellowstone County closed its doors 5 years ago, linked to a man who seldom revealed his presence. He always got what he wanted. But Alina's voice faltered as she read the last line. "Owner of record Victor Hunt." Jacob leaned back, taken aback. The name struck him with the force of a freight train. Hunt, the man behind it all. The auctions. The man Jacob had once worked for when shadows had fallen over his life. The man behind the operation that Jacob had attempted to move on. Yet the dog remained unyielding. Shadow's gaze lingered, unforgotten. He merely turned his head a fraction, observing Jacob, who remained as silent as always, as if to. "You already knew." Lily remained silent. She noticed Jacob quietly unraveling in the corner of the room. He rose gradually, moving towards the door before pausing. "Keep the scan," he instructed. Don't erase anything. Outside, the wind had picked up as Jacob stood by the truck. With his eyes shut, he murmured a secret that only the dog could comprehend: a name, a location, and a commitment, because now it wasn't merely about saving the dog from his history, it was concerning the commitment to ensure that no other being, whether bipedal or quadrupedal, would ever bear that same burden again. Jacob rest eluded him that night as the name on that file echoed in his mind, haunting him relentlessly, more resounding than the stillness enveloping his cabin. Victor Hunt. It transcended mere recollection. Was a door he had firmly locked away years ago, secured with a heavy lock and buried deep within a part of himself he never wished to revisit. But now it had swung wide open, and on the other side stood this dog, gazing back at him, a mirror of all that Jacob had previously left behind. By dawn, Jacob found himself seated on the front porch, held a thermos of lukewarm coffee, while the dog lay nearby, his head resting on Jacob's boot, breathing softly, steady yet watchful. The connection between them had evolved, now more profound. He was no longer merely he was a witness. Jacob stood, walked into the shed, and retrieved a box he hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were fragments of a different life, contractor IDs, old photographs, a paycheck stub with Hunt's name elegantly displayed at the top. Evidence, though not the type that would stand up in court, but rather the kind that couldn't be overlooked in a man's spirit. He had once toiled for Hunt, shoeing horses, repairing trailers, mending fences. That was the visible task. But beneath it all, whispers echoed from the always locked sheds. The sound of barking dogs that came and never deeper. Jacob had listened closely. It had witnessed far too much and accomplished far too little. He required the funds. He averted his gaze. He moved on when the atmosphere became too heavy, thick with smoke and cries, and now that same darkness had tracked him all the way to Bozeman. He summoned the deputy, Marshal Nathan Dwyer. Brief, succinct dialogue, no inquiries, merely a gathering. They settled into a tranquil cafe tucked away in the corner of town, enveloped by the gentle buzz of everyday existence, as Jacob meticulously unfolded his thoughts. Bit by bit, just the facts, plain and simple. I knew Hunt and I worked under him. I observed the cages. Dwyer's expression remained impassive, yet his eyes sharpened. Why now? Jacob remained silent. Instead, he retrieved the photo that Lily had scanned from the dog's chip registry. Its colors faded over time. An image of a younger dog, marked by scars, standing within a chain-link enclosure, with a number affixed to the wall behind. His expression shifted as he muttered, "You bought him," glancing at the lawman. "Auction," Jacob acknowledged. "I wasn't aware at the time, but I understand now." Dwyer brushed a hand through his beard. Hunt disappeared when the co-op fell apart. No documentation, no. In the quiet embrace of the woods, Jacob leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can find." The deputy didn't inquire about how he understood men like Jacob, quiet, damaged, yet possessing a depth that spoke volumes, a compass that directed with greater accuracy than the rest. If you choose to act, Dwyer advised, refrain from taking any action. Jacob's smile was fleeting, almost non-existent. It was too late for anything now. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. The dog stood patiently as Jacob returned, moving forward without a command. He understood that this was no longer merely a journey of healing. It had transformed into a confrontation. The following day, Jacob loaded the truck with only the essentials: a rope, a first aid kit, and a few other necessary items. Flashlight and old revolver he hadn't touched in years. The dog leaped into the passenger seat, slipping in effortlessly as if it were a familiar routine from a past existence. Silence enveloped them as they made their way out. The town was unnecessary. The wind rustled through the trees, amplifying every thought to a resonant clarity. Victor Hunt had constructed his realm upon quietude and suffering. Yet now, silence had become, approaching him with sharp edges and a history he couldn't escape. The journey back to the Willock's ranch was enveloped in silence, yet that silence spoke volumes. The dog sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes focused intently on the road, as if he possessed an innate sense of their destination. Jacob's hands tightened around the wheel, veins tense, jaw locked in that quiet fury only someone who's lived with guilt long enough can understand. The past no longer trailed them. It hovered, anticipating a decisive action. The clouds thickened over the forest as they approached the turnoff by the Custer timberline. The old gate remained hanging, shadowed rust flakes scattered like dead leaves on the ground. Jacob parked without turning off the engine. The air was thick, charged like the forest. They held their breath as the dog emerged first, limping yet resolute, its nose lowered and ears alert. Silence enveloped them. They retraced their steps along the familiar route to the clearing, navigating through the fractured fencing and past the scorched remnants of a stall where no years had passed, and there it was once more the very spot where the dog had howled. Yet this time, he remained silent. Instead, he began to dig. Jacob sank to his knees and joined him. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The dirt yielded to something substantial, a small metal box corroded at the hinges encased. Amidst the decaying fabric, Jacob paused, his heart thundering like a cautionary beat within his chest. Then, as I opened it, I was met with a collection of photograph images of dogs, dozens of them, all injured and caged, some barely recognizable. There were documents too, payment ledgers, auction slips, a notepad with scrolled dates and codes, and at the very bottom, a list of names. Jacob scanned through until he found it. Beside a line item that stated shoeing, transport no questions, his breath held, yet the dog's paw brushed against the edge of the box once more. Jacob glanced over. Another photo had slipped beneath the stack, one that hadn't faded like the others. Rest. It was the younger, leaner dog, a chain wrapped around his chest. Number 1479 on the kennel tag. Jacob looked at him. There was an accusation that feels more like acknowledgement, something profound, as if he had been anticipating this moment. His entire existence had been leading to this moment, where someone would not only observe the injustices he faced, but also take action. Jacob stood, with hands shaking. They filled the box and placed it in a canvas bag. They departed from the ranch without a word, yet the fire igniting within Jacob's chest had taken on a form, a purpose. Back in Bozeman, Jacob strode confidently into the sheriff's office, his dog faithfully at his side. Dwyer greeted him at the door, and a single glance revealed. Jacob's expression revealed everything, and he understood that whatever they had been anticipating had finally come. Jacob placed the bag on the desk. This is everything, he stated. By evening, the manhunt was reignited, with Hunt's name spreading rapidly among agencies. Satellite warrants were promptly issued, old case files reactivated. What had been buried in shadows now sat in the center of town, illuminated by a spotlight that no one could ignore. The following morning, as snow gently danced over the sidewalks of downtown Bozeman, Jacob and the dogs ventured out. As they emerged from the station, a few people stopped in their tracks. Some recalled seeing them in the auction video that had taken the internet by storm weeks ago. Even as they approached, silence enveloped the scene. No words were exchanged. Instead, they observed the man and his dog meandering through the town, as if they were part of a story unfolding before their eyes. Belong there now. Jacob glanced down at the dog. You ready to go home? A subtle. The tail wagged only once. They did not head towards the cabin, but instead ventured towards an unfamiliar destination. Jacob had been crafting in secrecy a small plot of land beyond Livingston, a place where no chains would ever bind a soul. Once more, and a place where dogs could find solace, run freely, and rest. Shadow would be the inaugural resident, not merely a survivor, but a protector. For ultimately, some narratives are not. It's not merely about survival. It's about the journey of a fractured spirit deciding to rise again. Another until neither recalls who rescued whom. And regarding Hunt, that's a diverse path, yet it is now being pursued just as he once pursued others. Jacob and the dog never looked back. They didn't need to. They had transformed pain into purpose, and somewhere in the wind that had pursued them in the past finally released its grip.